generally goes, how a bill becomes a law. And since then, we've been asked, what else can we learn at the Ledge? What other tools can you give us so that when we're at the Capitol, we know what else is going on? So we brought in Virginia from the Public Access Room. They are located on the fourth floor of the Capitol. The Public Access Room is the only room of its kind in the country. They are a resource for citizens. So if you have questions on the legislative process, legislators, how a bill is crafted, they're the folks to go to. So she's got information on the handouts we passed out. And I will let Virginia take the lead.
Thanks, Carmen. Usually I start out by giving you a little pamphlet on the Public Access Room, and I left my office today and started to write and said, oh, I forgot. And then I remembered you guys are probably all real techies anyway, and so just knowing that we exist, you can Google us and find us, and it'll tell you all about us. So as Carmen was saying, we're going to talk about the order of the day and what happens on the floor. And please ask questions as we go. I'm just going to dive right in. Order of the day. It's, the legislature, we use specialized language. So order of the day, what it's not. The daily special at your restaurant, that's not what it is. But what it is really an agenda. And on the back of the How a Bill Becomes a Law, I've got a little bit of, oh wait, that's the journal. Let me hand this out. This is a little bit of an order of the day, and you'll notice that at the top of it, it actually says order of business and then order of day. But we always talk about it as the order of the day. And it's basically just an agenda. And it's an agenda either for the state Senate, which has 25 members, and the Senate, as you probably know, has some specialized duties as a chamber. They also get to do the advise and consent. So when Governor Abercrombie appointed Linda Rosen, for example, as the Department of Health director, the Senate chose to advise and consent to that nomination. The House of Representatives with 51 members has their separate order of the day or agenda every day they're in session. And they have some special duties too. They can bring up orders of impeachment. So when is it issued? Only on session days. So days when they're actually convening in the chambers. And there's not going to be any session on recess days, holidays, or weekends. And sometimes people wonder about what is a recess day, and it's a day when they're actually, thank you, when they may be in committee hearings or in caucus and that kind of thing. They're just not in the chamber. And one of the handouts that I gave you is the 2014 session calendar. And the way you can tell whether or not it's a session day is to look at the lower right-hand corner. Each regular session that starts on the third Wednesday in January is comprised of 60 session days that they're convening in their chambers. So that's pretty straightforward. And when can you find it? Never when you're looking. It seems like it's never ready when you want it. Usually you have to wait until right before they're convening in session, and it'll appear. The time that they're going to convene is located at the top of the legislature's website. So usually it'll be 11:30 in the morning for the Senate and 12 noon for the House. And today was a special day because they had a very long agenda of third reading bills, so they were convening at 9 and 9:30 in the morning. And usually just an hour or so before, the orders of the day will be ready. And what you do is on the Hawaii Legislature's homepage, there's a little box that says Order of the Day, and you can select the date. So this is good for looking for past orders of the day as well. And you'll get links for the House and Senate orders of the day, as well as any supplemental documents, whether they're referral sheets or things like that. So on the back of this document, this is a sample order of the day, just so you can kind of see what it looks like. And so you'll have one for the House and one for the Senate. That makes sense. they're usually always meeting on the same day. There is a provision in the Constitution that says one can't go into recess for like 3 days without letting the other one know and that kind of stuff. But in reality, they act in concert with one another. And they, the Senate and the House, it seems like with everything they do things almost the same way, but they'll do them just a little differently. So if you're watching a status sheet, for example, one will enroll something to the governor and the other chamber will engross something to the governor. And it's like, what's the difference? There is not really a difference. It's just they decided to use different language. So the same is true with the order of the day. In their House and Senate rules, they have it spelled out as to how their order of the day is going to proceed, what order of business things are going to go. And the order is different on the House and the Senate side. Formatting is a little bit different. The links that appear, in this example, you've got links to the committee report, and you've got a link to the current version of the bill, but there's no link to the status sheet. On the Senate side, they've provided status sheet links so that people can go in and out of the testimony and status links. Part of the reason for that is that the Senate is more paperless than the House. So it makes sense that their members are demanding that. The House hasn't quite caught up with that yet. Some of the customs are different in the two chambers. The House chambers on second reading or the second vote on bills will routinely have debates. On the Senate floor, as Senator Thielen found out I don't know if any of you have read Senator Thielen's blog, but she pointed out that last year when she stood up to debate something on second reading, she was taught about the decorum on the Senate floor, that's not usually done. And also how the attachments and supplemental documents are done. Just a little bit different, so just be aware of that.
Can you explain what attachments and supplemental documents are?
Sure, yeah, for the order of the day, one of the items might be referrals. So there are bills that have crossed over to the chamber and they're now being sent to their various committees. So one chamber will deal with that as an attached document of referrals, and the other may list it in the order of the day and then have it appear a little bit differently. Yeah. And sometimes there are some other items that will come out as supplements to the order of the day, whether they're recommittals or things like that. And we can explore it a little bit more. Now, it used to be that the first item on the order of the day was the invocation. And it would be, a formal part of the agenda to have clergy, start the session off. And as you may, if you've been in the islands for a while, you'll know there's been quite a bit of debate about that as to whether or not it's appropriate. The House now does show an invocation on their agenda, and it specifies who's offering the invocation, but it pointedly happens before they gavel in. And it's at the discretion of the speaker as to whether or not to have the invocation. On the Senate side, they don't have it on their order of the day, and it does happen again before the gavel. And and what it means by having it before the gavel is that it's up to the member's discretion to come into the chambers for that proceeding, rather than being having to.
So they don't have to be there until the gavel is hit.
Yeah.
So once the gavel hit, then everybody can come rushing in or something.
Yeah, they're supposed to be seated when the gavel hits, yeah. And nobody's supposed to be like crossing the floor when the speaker or the president is presiding, and you're not supposed to get up and leave.
How do they
when the
do that,
speaker's
like,
presiding.
after the invocation? Do they give like a 5-minute period? Or?
Well, people know, they watch as the speakers and, the clerks are helping to direct.
Or people could be present for the invocation but not choose to rise.
Oh, they could choose to ignore it completely and be, Facebooking, yeah. So the first items usually on the order of the day, are the routine items. Roll call, who's in the chamber. If they're not present, they're usually noted as excused. Approval of journal. Sometimes this can happen just, they'll defer it if it's not quite ready, and it's really procedural. And most of the time, what you'll have is a little interaction between the clerk, who's the primary administrative person for the chamber, and the presiding, whether it's the Senate speaker, president or House Speaker. Do we have any messages from the governor? No, Mr. Speaker, we do not. Do we have any messages from the Senate? Sometimes the messages are of note, and sometimes they're just routine communications. And then other regular business items. The House has the Hawaii word of the day, which Representative Hanahano presents on a daily basis.
So where does does the state keep track of the attendance then, basically?
Oh, yeah.
So where does that information can be found?
Online, you can find the House attendance sheets.
And then it shows who's been absent.
It's got X's on each day as to whether yep.
And that's only for session days though.
Yeah, but it's easy to find for the House. For the Senate, you would have to call the Senate clerk's office, or do some research by looking back through the Senate journals, which you would have to get through the Senate clerk's office unless you had access to the big old
In
phone.
addition to attendance, is there card games? Or is it soccer?
It would be, I don't know how tardiness is, it might say partial. I can't remember offhand what it says as far as, if they've come partway through the session. But quite often, if a member arrives late, what will happen is that the presiding person, the speaker, vice speaker, president, vice president will say, clerk, let it be known that so-and-so is not present. So that, in the journal that Representative Lee came. So sometimes there are floor presentations, which are kind of an opportunity for the House and the Senate to honor different groups, and the food bank was one, softball team. Sometimes it can be, more or less weighty, but it's an opportunity. Sometimes it can be done with resolutions. The House may have a resolution, or it can just be just a floor presentation. And the senators and representatives arrange that with the clerk's offices. And they're limited to the number that they can do. They have to calendar them and schedule. And usually at the end of the order of the day, they know that there's a floor presentation the following day. And quite often, if there is a floor presentation, after the floor presentation is done, they will gavel off and do a recess in order to allow members to greet our honored guests, that kind of thing.
So how do you get one of these floor presentations?
You
work
with the legislator. Yeah. We say, this would be appropriate. Our group is having a 30th anniversary, and we've done so much, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Do the legislators typically buy their own things for this?
They do. They have certain allowances. So that they've got their legislative allowance, and that would be an appropriate use of an allowance to buy ways for honored guests. And sometimes, too, I might mention that there are times when the legislators will say, I'd like to call to attention, the AARP that's in attendance today in the gallery, would you please rise and be recognized? That kind of thing can go on as well. And then they get into, the nuts and bolts of things, introduce bills and resolutions. You all know about bills that become laws. They also have resolutions, which can be, concurrent resolutions that are adopted by both chambers and don't have the weight, the force and effect of law, but can express the will and intent of the legislature. And then they can also do, I just want to point out, the resolutions are the way that they establish the rules that they are then going to follow. So the House and the Senate actually adopt resolutions, majority of them vote that, yes, these are the rules we're going to use. And they're the rules that govern how things are done. And they can be very interesting documents to read through if you're interested in that sort of thing. So sometimes these things can look the introduction of bills, this is how many there are, and we're just going to introduce them, and they all pass first reading, and away we go, waiting for the referrals. Standing committee reports is another item you'll see, and that's what's on this order of the day that I gave you. I want to point out one of them, the top of page 3. One of the things that can be a little bit tricky with orders of the day is that we're so busy tracking bills, we always think in terms of bill numbers. So when you first look at an order of the day, sometimes the order of items can be a little bit wonky, because you're like, why are we going from HB 2106 to 2305 to 20? I mean, in that case, they're all chronological, but really the order of these is by standing committee report number. That's the order they're using. And so here we've got standing committee report number 182-12 for HB 2106. And on the flip side of this was from 2012, you'll see, I just kind of wanted to bring it home to a status sheet, which is what we're usually looking at. If you look on February 8th, it says, it was reported from education, recommending passage on second reading and referral to finance. And sure enough, the second entry for February 8th is it passed second reading, referred to the Committee on Finance with none voting no, and Chris Lee excused. And then that's reflected in the journal as well. We could find that in here, that this is what they did. So just know that when they write those committee reports, they're in the form of a letter from the committee to the speaker or to the president, but that committee report actually gets adopted by the chamber. There are occasions when there will be debate, even when there's not second reading, about those committee reports, whether or not they should be adopted or whether it should be pushed back. And then, of course, readings. That's the main thing that we think about. When you're looking at how a bill becomes a law, we get focused when we're advocating for a bill to get these hearings in committees, right? Because we know that we need to get through committees by these certain deadlines, and if we don't get through those hearings and through those committees, we're going to be dead. But also these oval things, these first, second, and third readings are really, those are the things that are required by the Constitution to happen, right? So 3 readings, and it says in the Constitution they've got to be on separate days. And before you have a vote on the third or final reading, the members have to have it in their possession for 48 hours. And that's why we have that decking deadline on Friday, so that all the members would have in their possession the bills they were being asked to vote on today. Now today, they made some changes on some of the bills. They did what they call floor amendments. So the bills came to them and they said, well, let's make this change. They adopted that changed version of, they said, okay, yes, let's adopt this change. So now we're waiting another 48 hours for them to vote on that amended version of the bill, which will be Thursday, which is the crossover deadline.
You say they, you're committee, or?
No, I'm talking about the chamber.
Senate?
Yes. So for example, the 25 senators today were talking about, there was a bill about drones. And somebody offered a floor amendment, and they voted yes, let's make this floor amendment. And so now the bill is, maybe it was an SD2 and now it's an SD3. It's the third time it's changed. And so now it has been filed for third reading on Thursday.
So when an amendment is added, it needs to start the three readings again?
No, it just needs to have the 48 hours notice before they're asked to vote on it.
So they can do a gut replace on the final reading, and then just one more reading, and
Oh, well. You mean, so you're saying to do a gut and replace on the floor?
yeah, I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
That would be too hard.
Sunday, bloody Sunday. I don't know.
Never happened?
I haven't seen it happen.
That usually happens at committee.
But they could have.
Theoretically, I suppose, you would need to have a majority of the members agreeing that that made sense to do that.
Or not paying attention.
Well, yeah. And what they did yesterday, just so you know, is yesterday was a recess day. And the reason it was a recess day was so that they could meet in caucus to talk about, okay, what items are we all in agreement on? We'll put those on a consent calendar so we don't even need to have any debate about those. And what items will go on the ordinary calendar? And, are you really going to be offering a floor amendment on this? And yeah.
The dates of the readings aren't fixed. The votes on the floor in the chambers, they're not on the calendar?
No, because the 3 readings can happen at any time. The readings can only happen on session days, right? So you won't have any readings happening during that 5-day mandatory recess, right? The key is that all 3 readings have to happen by that first crossover deadline in the originating chamber. And then the 3 readings in the non-originating chamber have to happen by the second crossover deadline.
Right.
And then the final reading has to happen by the end of session.
There's no public testimony for floor amendments, right?
Right.
And then SDs?
Or Senate.
Yes.
SD1 would be Senate Draft 1.
Draft. So the House, the House one would say HD 1, 2, 3.
Right. So if the House had made a change to that, it would have been HD. Yeah. And those are just snippets I put up there just as an example to show you, final reading, and also the different version. So this is what it looks like on the Senate order of the day. See, they've got prior versions. You had a question?
Friday was a decking day, you said?
Yeah, so if you look on your, Friday the 28th of February was the first decking deadline. So it was the deadline to get out of all of its committees in the originating chamber.
And since they don't convene on the weekends, and then Monday, because it was a recess, so that gives them 48 hours?
Mhm. Yeah, so it's 2 days basically.
Is it 2 session days or just 48 hours in general?
Just 48 hours.
Like they were doing it 8 o'clock in the morning, and then they place it 24, and then today we're at 48.
Yeah, well, they also had the weekend.
Oh, so they didn't
Yeah,
count that
so
far.
they got more than enough time, yeah. And I'm not sure legally what we could look at the HRS or the Constitution and see what legal interpretations have been made.
But as long as it has,
Because
because
time.
they would agree on a weekend, but not convene together with their.
Yeah. But for example, today, they're now scheduled for 48 hours from now, and tomorrow's a recess day, so that shows it doesn't need to be a session day. And then one other thing to note is that for third or final reading, they've got to make sure that it's not just a majority of the members who are present, but it's a majority of the members to which the chamber is entitled, which is not usually an issue, but every now and then that can be an issue.
Is that the chambers?
Well, so you've got 25 senators. So if 5 of the senators weren't present, and you had a vote on something, and the vote was 12 to 8. Does that make sense? 12 to 8. And so, okay, so it passes. Well, no, because 12 isn't a majority of the 25 members. You would need to have at least 13 members. It doesn't usually come up, but... And then advising consent is something that the Senate may be asked to vote on, and that would appear on the order of the day. Like they're asked to consent to judges, so there may be a judiciary communication saying, they've nominated a judge, or a governor's message, as I mentioned earlier, Linda Rosen.
So what happens if they they don't recommend them, or do they have to recommend them?
No, they don't have to. No, if they say no, we don't, then,
The process starts all over again.
yeah, the governor submits another name for nomination.
So
In
how-
reality, what happens, it seems, more common than that, because at the legislature, I must say, they're, for better or for worse, they tend to go with a rather polite way of doing things like that. As you notice in committees, you'll very rarely have a vote where they vote down a bill, right? Instead, they'll just, we'll defer it. We're not even going to take the vote, right? So in a similar way, what will happen is it will become apparent that there's a problem with the nomination, and the governor will, for example, withdraw the nomination, find someone else. But sometimes it does, it comes forward, and there's some very rigorous debate and testimony over folks. And at the end of the order of the day, there's usually announcements. They'll announce, okay, these are the floor presentations for tomorrow. This is when we're going to convene. We've got a committee referral sheet. We've got hearings scheduled. But this is also when they, might say, oh, so-and-so's got a birthday, and, other things. Oh, there's a movie about fire ants that's happening. Come see it, that kind of stuff. So they use the very end for the announcements. And there's a lot of things that they're asked to do on the floor. So agree, disagree. If you with the legislative process, we know that it's got to go through the House and through the Senate, and then we come to this place where they can agree or disagree. And that's something that actually appears on the order of the day of whether or not we agree or disagree with the changes. And default is to disagree. And what happens behind the scenes is that members are told that if they want to advocate that a certain that instead the chamber agree to the amendments made by the other chamber, that they put that in writing and submit it. So a way for them to do that. They can also recall, they can recommit, they can do all sorts of things that don't happen very often. But there was one item towards the end of the order of the day today from the Senate. Today's Senate order of the day, craziness. It was like, how many pages? 82 pages. Yeah. But they got through by 2 o'clock and the House is still going, so go figure. But they had one, that was relating to energy performance contracting for public buildings. And it was the second to the, or the third to the last item. And for whatever reason, they decided to recommit it to the Ways and Means Committee. It had been reported out from Ways and Means, and now it's been recommitted. Now, there's usually a story there, right? What it is, sometimes it just takes a phone call. Sometimes it can be more exciting than others. Sometimes it can be quite dull. But just know that that can happen. They can also re-refer bills, and you may have seen that while you're watching some of the deadlines. That re-referral is one of the ways that a bill that you thought was dead is suddenly brought back to life because for whatever reason, the chair of the final committee, quite often will waive their right to hear that bill so that then the bill's made. So. And then they adopt resolutions as well. So lots of.
What is a recall?
I knew you were going to get asked that because as soon as I said recall, I said, what is recall? Let me think
Is
for
it
a
recall of
second.
the members, or is it recall of,
No,
of bills or something?
I think you know what it is. It's to recall a bill from the committee to the floor. So if the bill has been referred to a committee and it's been with that committee for at least 20 days, there's a certain number of members, I don't remember if it's 1/3 or 1/5 of the chamber, can vote to recall the bill from the committee and then take action.
Does it take you too long on it or something, or you're not doing anything?
Yeah, so it's the kind of thing that if the chair of the committee is very against the legislation, but the majority of the body is for it, they could say, no, we don't want you sitting on that. We want to bring it forward. I think think it happened with civil unions at one point, but I can't remember if it happened as a recall or whether Senator Taniguchi voluntarily did something, but yeah, it does happen, not very often.
We tried to do it this session too with a bill that would exempt businesses or give them religious exemptions for
Oh.
same-sex marriages. So a representative was trying to recall a bill, and the chairperson whose committee it was in said, it doesn't make sense, all of my members will vote against it, why hear a bill where I know that they're going to vote it down? So that was one thing that happened this session.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. But thank you. And I remember. So who gets to speak, you know? The rules on how this all works is, I don't know if any of you are meeting junkies, but this Manual of Legislative Procedure, Mason's Manual, is kind of it's governed by the rules of the House and the Senate, but then if the House and the Senate rules don't cover it, they turn to Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure. And that's a common book that's used with state legislatures across the country. So to speak, you have to actually be recognized by the speaker or the president, whoever's presiding. And so you stand at your desk and you wait to be recognized, Mr. Speaker, you know, and then you proceed. There's a limit on the number of times you can speak. Usually it's twice on a certain item, unless you're the member who has moved to, say, you're the member who's presenting the bill for adoption, then you can respond more times. In the House, there is a time limit. So if you're watching House floor sessions, quite often when someone's really waxing eloquent and getting into it, you'll hear another member rise and say, "No, Mr. Speaker, I yield my time." That's like, okay, thank you. And I think it's 2 minutes that they're 2 or 3 minutes. In the Senate, they can go on, and yet they finish it too.
So by yielding the time, you're giving the time to somebody else? Or?
Yeah. They're saying, I'm not going to speak on this, so you go ahead. And you know, you do the formal, I make a motion, the motion has to be seconded. There are sometimes interruptions, you know, that are always in order, you know, like a point of order. If someone thinks that, oh, you know, this isn't proceeding according to the rules, you know, point of order, you know, I believe we're still debating the amendment and you're back on this, so. And quite often, if there's a point of order, there'll very quickly be a recess, you know, return at the call of the chair to figure things out when they're non-official. And there's a lot of recessing in and out for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they'll recess out, you know, just so that they can caucus. If there's, oh gosh, okay, wait, we've got way too much going on here, let's recess, get our ducks in a row, and figure out who's going to.
So can anyone call for a recess, or is it?
You know, I don't know offhand. I know that recess is usually called by the, I don't think so. I think it's usually called by either the presiding or quite often the vice speaker or the vice president will say, Mr. Speaker, recess. So I think anyone can ask for it, but I think it's up to the presiding person. Yeah. But I think most people don't ask for it unless they've got a good reason.
Well, I mean, if it's something that their caucus wants to.
Right, but if it's like, I've got to go pee, you know.
Do they recess for it too, or?
They do, yeah.
And for meals?
Yeah. So for today, both chambers took a half-hour meal break. Yeah. And then they'll routinely ask for rulings on conflict of interest. They'll be doing like a energy bill, and someone will stand and say, Mr. Speaker, I'd like a ruling on a potential conflict of interest. I'm going to state your conflict. Oh, I own shares of HACO stock. No conflict. Okay. Most of the time, the answer is no conflict. Today, I actually heard one where it was like, there is a conflict, you're excused from voting. And that was a bill that would have, I think it was in regard to, you know, people who bring lawsuits against the state and an appropriation for that. And the person standing said that he was an attorney on behalf of one of the people who would, you know, would be getting the settlement. And so President Kim said, that's a conflict, you're out of the scope. So they have to vote if they're, yeah.
So are you supposed to call out your own conflict of interest?
Yes.
Do people call out other people's conflict?
No.
So that doesn't happen?
So what happens if you know that there's another person with conflict of interest?
Ooh, that would be an ethical issue, I guess. Yeah.
On the Senate side, citizens are allowed to bring that to the attention of the Senate President.
Oh, yeah, definitely people could bring it to, but I'm thinking on the floor, it's something that I believe is in the rules as well as, I'm not sure where it is in the ethics, in the HRS, but certainly they're required to stand and state potential conflicts. Even if they know that they'll routinely be said, no conflict, no conflict.
What would happen if,
And it's interesting because one member will do it, and then all of a sudden you'll see everybody else going, oh, that's me too. I own the HICO stock too, so do I. And
So
sometimes
it's
it'll
not a
be cascaded.
very watertight system of getting all the conflict of interest on them.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too because, you know, what is defined as a conflict of interest, you know? I mean, if you're, what were they talking about today? Oh, they were talking about campaign finance, public financing of elections. And so there were a number of people who stood and said, you know, actually, we're all potential conflicts of interest because anyone, you know, because this was the one about potentially providing public financing for the House of Representatives elections. And so they said, well, all of us are potentially conflict of interest on this. But then other members stood and said, you know, I actually had an election where I did obtain some public funding, so I'm going to declare that.
Can they excuse themselves, or if the presiding says
No,
no conflict, then you have to accept it?
yeah, you've got to vote one way or the other. Yeah, unless you're not present for whatever reason. Did you have a question?
so if nobody stands up and says, I have a conflict of interest, they vote on it, and it comes up later on, oh, this guy, you know, owns stock in Monsanto or whatever, and voted on the bill, would that make that bill invalid because they got voted without disclosing?
I don't believe so. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't believe it would. I don't believe
Or
it
just
would.
stuff?
You know, I mean, if it were something that were so egregious that there were, you know, you had your whole chamber and more than half the chamber had, I don't know, interest in an office building and it needed some special something and they all voted to give it that and then it came out that this was what was happening, you know, then, you know, then you come up into something that's a little murkier. And I think that there are provisions for dealing with something like that. But I think for a single person, I don't think. I mean, there are, then we get into the ethics rules and we get into the self-governing rules adopted by the House and the Senate as to how they can censure their own members and how they can expel their own members and that kind of thing. So I think that would be the mechanism, but as I said, I'm not an expert on that, and I'm not really prepared to answer that off the top. Yeah.
So how do they set their salaries?
Oh, the salaries are in the HRS.
So it's just by the HRS, they don't ever vote on, like, changing their,
Oh, they have had to vote on their salaries, yeah.
so do they as a house vote on their own salaries increases, or?
They do, but boy, we're getting off of what I know about. I mean, you know.
Well, I would say, talk about conflict of interest.
No, there's a salary commission or something
Okay.
like that. I can't remember off the top of
There's
my head.
some other
If
third
you-
body that kind of determines.
Yeah, but then they do get to vote yes or no, and, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you call the public access room, we'll be happy to, we could help you find, the last time that it happened and kind of trace back the procedure and everything. And there's a lot of information there as to how the salary was, and then there was some freezing done and then unfreezing and stuff. So, yeah, that's the kind of thing if I'm at my desk.
Have you ever seen the salary go down?
It did get frozen, and I can't remember if it had a 5% decrease or not. I don't remember.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we mentioned, floor amendments can be offered. They're not offered on most of the bills, but they can be offered. Today there were, I think, 7 floor amendments offered on the Senate side. And you can find them by going to the bill itself. It'll have it posted. The floor amendment will be posted where there are all versions of the measure, and then of course the amended version of the bill will appear on the status sheet as well. In addition, if you wanted to find out, say you were just curious, boy, she said 7 amendments, I wonder what other bills were amended today on the Senate floor, you could go to Reports and Lists, my favorite button on the homepage, and Daily Updates, and put in today's date, and up will come the documents that were issued today, and it will include the floor amendments. So, yeah. And, I mentioned they were in caucus yesterday. One of the things they're talking about is the consent calendar, or the modified consent calendar. Even once you've got the order of the day, know that they can still move things around. Sometimes they will move an item to the end of the calendar if they're having, a time to rally support, could be one reason. There was an item on the Senate calendar this morning that was the first item up, which was SB 180 or something. And the Senate president said, we're working on a floor amendment for that bill, so we're going to move that to later in the calendar. It's just that easily done. Yeah.
When they're in the chamber and they're making changes like floor amendments, are those displayed up on a big screen for everybody, or are they seeing them in front of them?
They're seeing them in front of them, yeah. For the senators, it's all, because they're paperless, it's all electronic. For the House members, I'm not sure. I believe it's just done with paper or electronically. I think they have a choice now as to how they want their things delivered. But most of what they're doing is debating about the bills in the form that they've come to them. And as I mentioned, they can do a yes vote, they can do a no vote, they can be excused if there is a conflict of interest or if they're not present that day. There is a vote of Kanalua, which is kind of like, I'm not wanting to vote right now, but eventually that gets recorded as an aye vote. And then, of course, they've got ayes with reservations. We were laughing today because there were people who were rising and saying, I'd like to note my reservations. And people would rise, I'm rising yes with small reservations. And it's like, oh my gosh. And somebody else, I've just got Manini reservations. It's like, oh goodness, no. It's like, and ayes with reservations, as you're probably aware, count as a yes vote. Yeah.
Do you have to state your reservations, or you can just say, I have reservations?
No, you can just say, I have reservations. But you may want to rise and say, I'm voting aye with reservations and I would like to submit written comments, which is a common thing to do. And sometimes they take the vote just by voice, and especially for a consent calendar, all in accordance say aye, aye.
Well, how does if they know that the reservation is just aye, then why stop everything and give a reservation?
To get recorded so that the constituents can see that you weren't
Oh, yeah.
happy about it?
So if you look at the, I don't think we have any, this is such tiny type, but so if, down here, we've got Marilyn Reed's written remarks put in there. If she was eyes with reservations, she could spell out, the reason I'm in accordance with the intent of this measure, however, I think the mechanism is flawed, and I'm afraid there's going to be abuse with blah, 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 blah. And she could put that in writing, so that if you as a constituent came to her and said, Ms. Lee, how could you have voted for this? Say, well, you can look in the journal, and you can at least understand it a little bit better. Well, she's got the reservations. So they can vote by voice vote. Members can call for a roll call vote if they want to make sure that, I want everyone's name on this vote. I don't want any hiding of, oh yeah, well, that happened and I wasn't paid. No, you put it down, yes or no. Unanimous consent, that's, quite often they'll say unanimous consent. Sometimes they'll do raising of hands. Sam Sloan did a lot of raisings of hands today. Senate President would say, and do we have unanimous consent? And up would go Sam's hand, and it's like, okay, we've got 24 ayes and 1 no. one no, over and over again. There's a modified form in the House. Quite often what they'll do is the majority and minority floor leaders will compile the votes so that the speaker will say, and how do your members vote? And say, Representative Cavanella will stand and say, Speaker, on page 17, items blah through blah, all members vote aye with the exception of Rep. So, and so, who vote with aye with reservation, and Rep. So, who votes no. And that's how it's recorded. The same would be for the minority members. So they've got customs. They do aloha wear on Fridays. Yay. It's a little more colorful. When they're addressing other members, one of the I don't know where it comes from, but you don't call each other names, and you don't call each other by name. So I wouldn't say, Representative Fale. I would say, the representative from wherever he's from. I can't even remember off the top of my head. Or, I agree with the previous speaker. Or I would like to have the remarks of the previous speaker entered into the journal as if they were my own, meaning I concur with the previous speaker. Submitting written comments, there's usually a deadline that they've got to submit the written comments by, so quite often you've got staffers who are easily typing away their position paper, that kind of thing. Sometimes they will leave the journal open to accommodate those written comments, and they'll usually specify when they'll be. And then I just want to mention the clerk, when you're watching, have any of you gone to the galleries to sit and watch the floor sessions? A couple of people. Okay, so you've got all your members in a semicircle, and everybody has their designated place to sit. They don't get to choose. They're assigned where they sit. And the minority members will be together, and the majority members take up the rest of the space. And usually you'll have your leadership positions right up near the front, in the front row. But in front of the presiding speaker or president, you'll find the clerk and the assistant clerk, and sometimes another person who are actually keeping record of everything that transpires. So they're keeping record of what is said, all of the votes that are happening. They're in charge of okay, what are the governor's messages? What's on the order of the day? What bill are we on? What's the committee report? What are we doing? So they really do a lot of work. Sergeant-at-Arms are there to maintain order. So if you try to enter the Senator House Gallery with a big old placard that says no to GMOs, they will probably say, I'm sorry, but we're going to not ask you to have placards here today. Or if you're loud and boisterous and that kind of stuff. And they'll also escort guests on and off the floor of the House or the Senate.
Is it, so there's a video recording of the proceedings also that is archived, so just in case there's a conflict between what they've written?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I'll get to that in just 1 second. So I mentioned the Mason's Manual, but, you know, the state constitution is the thing that guides really, you know, what's going on, and then the House and Senate rules and the Mason's Manual. And the journal is, you know, I've got just a little bit of it here, and you can see just by looking at this little bit of it, that it can be rather a dry document to walk through, right? I mean, it's just got every single thing that's on there, which can be nice, you know, if you're doing research and whatnot. And if you're doing research, it's really nice because you can go into the House journals online. Just on the homepage, legislature's homepage, there's a little bar that says House and Senate. You click on House, and then you can look at the journal for this year. Or if you want to go back in time, you can go to archives, and there's the little link for House journals, and you go in and out of all the dates, and you can search for your bill number. It's all very good. The Senate, you got to go to the published thing, or you've got to call the Senate clerk's office if you're looking for this year's session.
What format is it in when you look at it? On
It's PDF.
Or is there any move to like different format that's easy to
That's easy to what?
easy to access through, you know?
Yeah, I know they've got it on PDF. I can't remember if they have it in any other. I think it's all PDF. Might be some HTML.
Yeah, see HTML would be awesome. Or
Yeah, we can look at the end, we can go online and see. And there are always bound volumes of the House and Senate journals down in the LRB library, which is down in the basement of the Capitol. It's open to the public, and they've got research librarians who'd be happy to help you find what you need. That's a picture of a page. So video, so back to your question about do they record? The answer is, I'm not entirely sure, honestly. Last year, the House was quite good at every day that they were in session, recording the proceedings, and then posting them on the House web streaming page, which was really nice, which is where all of the broadcasts of any of the select hearings and, you know, we broadcast the events today. You know, when they have their final reading the day, we'll broadcast that as well as the opening day, state of the state. And that all appears on the web streaming page. Last year, the House was doing that. And we thought, yay, we hope the Senate catches up. Well, this year, the Senate has kind of in a roundabout way started recording their floor sessions and posting them online. But the House seemed to be recording, but then they would just kind of flash up there as though they were recording, and then they've never been seen up again. So I don't know whether the House clerk has the recordings, but they've just chosen not to post them, whether because of technical difficulties or because it's a policy decision. I'm not entirely sure. It seems like something that I would say, from a public access point of view, it seems like something that should be able to be provided to the public. That if you've got the capability of recording the proceedings, you know, put them up there, at least there, you know.
Maybe space to keep it stored. Or they had, like I said, technical.
Yeah.
Maybe they filled up all the equipment they'd already bought and they didn't know whether they should delete it. You know, for
You know, I don't know. I mean, I know that they ran into some audio problems, and then after that, I don't know what happened. And so I wish I could answer that question better for you, but at the moment, it seems as though you can find the Senate daily floor sessions online, and on the home page, you click on the broadcast button on the lower right, and you select either Senate or House web streaming, and you can view the proceedings that way.
So the law says they may record the sessions and they may post those videos?
The law, I don't think the law is silent.
Oh, there's no law about it.
No,
This
I
is
mean,
just-
they're public. The sessions are public,
Okay.
unless they're, closed for executive session, which I can't recall them ever doing that. So the proceedings are public, so you can go and watch them, and you can take out your little video camera and you can film them. But as to whether the chamber themselves records and provides a recording to the public is not mentioned, at least not until now. I mean, and the House and the Senate could certainly pass rules. There's currently, Marcus Oshiro just introduced a resolution, it's HR 44, asking that things be recorded and provided. So they could tell themselves that that's what they need to do.
The committee meetings are not recorded. Sort of thing.
No, not unless they're being broadcast, and only a very few are broadcast.
Who decides which ones get broadcast?
Well, the public access room is involved in that. Suzanne Marinelli is she's the contract administrator for the legislative broadcast project. And so she selects certain hearings for broadcast. Sometimes the chairs of the committees will request, like, I really think this is of interest. Sometimes it's based on, interest. This Red Hill, the tank leak thing that's been happening. They've got 6 committees convening on Friday afternoon to talk about that, and that will be broadcast. It could be a variety of things. The GMO issue has been important, so there might be a time when there's a hearing about that would be broadcast. But it's a limited amount of funds, so.
Have you ever heard of a committee that specifically said we don't want to be broadcast or recorded?
I have. Luckily, we can ignore that most of the, it's what's good is that I think it makes more sense to me that someone like Suzanne or the public access room would be involved in trying to help select what would be broadcast than to leave it up to the committee chairs, which in the past it's been a little bit more that way.
But the committee chairs always have the veto power, right? If they don't want it, they can just say no.
Well, I guess I suppose they could say no, but I think if a chair said no to something that seemed to really be of compelling public interest and it made sense and we hadn't covered it before and it I think probably what would happen is we would go to leadership and say, really? And so it hasn't come up.
And my detail is on the Senate and the House rules, the legislative rules. So if you want to know more, like the different parameters and all of that.
For recording?
For recording, right? So you go down to the footer at capitol.hawaii.gov and click on Senate rules or House rules, and then there's a section that specifies.
Yeah, I can't remember. Because I think the Senate used to say something about newspaper column mentions or something, and I can't remember what it says now because obviously there's a lot. It's almost like
Words on this last year.
I was like, how many times it's been retweeted? But it's something that's been talked about a lot. I don't know if any legislation is currently still alive in regard. Well, there's some stuff that was carried over from last year that's still in conference, right? Regarding broadcast and or recording.
Yeah, but
different
the
things.
conferees have been discharged.
Right.
So.
Yeah, but they got discharged from all of the carryover bills. They got discharged. So. Anyway.
So it's still attached to a conference committee, but there's just no conferees.
Right.
Right.
So there's no assigned folks, and just based on past years, we're not as optimistic when that happens, even though legally it means the bill is still alive.
Right. It takes some extra will
Yeah.
to bring things back, to bring the zombie back to life.
Yeah.
It takes a little bit more commitment. Yeah.
Especially if there's a bill similar to it that's on at this session. So if it's the only bill of its kind and it's from last session, probably more likely, but you never know.
But so that's really what I have for you tonight. I hope that was some good information. Thank you guys for coming. Do you have any other questions or anything you wish I'd gone into?
Yeah, about the readings, how long can these bills be? Do they have to read the whole thing?
That's a good question. So when we say readings, the first, second, and third reading, in the old days, like way old days, the reason they're called readings is they would literally read the bill, They don't do that anymore. They just call it a reading and it's actually a vote.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So do they say anything? I mean, do they summarize it? Or what do they-
No, usually it'll be on the calendar, on the order of the day, and it's the bill title. Sometimes in parentheses, it'll have, the keywords, and it's up to the members to read the bill for voting. And one of the things that the staffers do behind the scenes is do bill digests and depending on the member and how much information they want, the staffers will prepare digests to kind of summarize what's the meat of the bill, what are the possible objections that were raised by testifiers along the way, or by which legislators voted no or with reservations and why.
Are any of those digests available to the public?
Are any of those digests
Yeah.
available to the public? That would be up to the legislator, yeah.
So-
As to what their internal, what their notes are. That's up to the legislator.
So each legislator individually can ask for this digest to be
Yeah.
from their own staff to be doing this.
Yeah. Now, there are also digests that can be made that would be provided to the entire majority or minority caucus. And when I say that, I mean so all the members who are Democratic members and all the Republican members.
But they have their own caucus staff.
Have their own caucus stuff, and they would have an agreed upon format which would list all of the measures that they're, for example, being asked to vote on today. And I saw one, I know Ian Lynn's blog, he posted one that was from the Senate side. And it basically just lists, the bills, and it lists who voted no or with reservations, and it wasn't all that interesting, to be honest with you. But it facilitates the discussion in caucus, so that they can talk more knowledgeably about, which committees it up to, all that stuff. Good? Yeah. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.